You know, reading used to be one of the most commemorable hobbies anybody could have. It was where you went and you explored new ideas, studied, and became more well-known about how the world works and how people think. It used to be an incredibly important skill, as it would be the number one way you could explore things like philosophy and whatnot. But today, instead of being one of the most important ways to expand your mind and your knowledge base, reading has instead become the woman's favorite way to get their end off, to flick it all around and make sure that they can have all the sensual pleasures they desire, going from what once used to be an exploration of knowledge to now an exploration of all the weird ways that a veiny member can explore your body. It isn't anything that is commemorable anymore, and most importantly, it is one of the most harmful aspects of modern society. The overabundance and overconsumption of pornographic material is actively degrading the ability for women to talk to people, for women to experience romantic relationships, and to engage with men. They no longer accept men flirting with them or not because they don't do it in the way that the feigned werewolf monster man with a monster cock is going to go about and doing it. There's a completely massive divide between the two, and worst of all, we refuse to call a spade a spade. When you look at the reading habits of women, there's one word that should come to mind: porn, because that's what it is. They're reading pornography, but we refuse to call it. We use sanitized words such as romantasy and smut and fantasy and booktock slop. We use all these magical words to wave away the actual thing that it is. They're reading pornographic material. And that's just ultimately causing a major issue. And thankfully, a lot of people are knowing about this. It's actually a really big issue because it also makes it so that people, like men, can't read. Male literacy rates are on the floor. They're non-existent because of the fact that there are no books written for men. There is no such thing as women's literature anymore because all literature is for women and there are none for men. Over the last few years, the approved publishers published no male novels. No male writers got published because there are no books for men, aside from like Brandon Sanderson, and even then he barely writes for men anymore. The focus is now nothing more than cheap, hedonistic, sexual pleasure and conquest, things that make you feel like you've done something important just by reading a book and now you're all satisfied. It's literally the 50 Shades of Grey scene from The Office, but instead of being stigmatized, it is now completely socially acceptable. And one of the major issues with this is it means that men aren't reading. I've been trying to get into reading. I'm reading this one, The Bookman's Wake. It's kind of interesting. I got this because I want to read it. I have a Bible here because I need it for this discussion. And plenty of books back there and over on another bookshelf, mostly philosophy and a few older fiction novels. Problem is, it's impossible for me to find anything to read now because so much of what was being published, was being made, is utterly dominated by porn and lowest common denominator sexual gratification. And sure, we can discuss some of the negatives. Yes, I'm playing the Sydney Sweeney ad behind me, and I see the small irony in that it was made for male sexual gratification and women to look up to. Otherwise, I'm only playing it for you guys, not for me. In fact, I have a pretty funny story when it comes to this whole book problem, in that a few years ago, I was talking to this girl on Tinder. We were talking about hockey. It was going great. She really liked hockey. It was going fantastic. A few days talking on Tinder, and then third day, we're out of topics. No idea what to talk about. So I messaged her. I'm like, hey, I see in your bio it says you like to read. What do you like to read? And she responded with smut. That was her answer to me as to what she liked to read. And I was, as a person who is of moderate modesty, was thoroughly stunned and did not know how to respond, and it would have been awkward to have responded. Now, some people think I'm an asshole for not responding to her, for effectively ghosting her, because she told me her favorite hobby is to watch or read porn. If I told her that, if she asked me what do I like to watch, and I said I like to watch porn, I would expect her to block me and report me in an instant. But because it's all reading and it's all smut, it's perfectly socially acceptable for people to do that. And thankfully, I'm not the one who's noticed this, as 2 different articles have come out from the social pariah known as fandom polls. At least they're still talking at least slightly sensically. Of course, the first article, while spot on because it's reporting on a video that was done, the second article that I'm going to read, where of course neocons are going to neocon and demand social control. So first they're on board, and then of course they go straight to their authoritarian roots and ruin it all. So before any further, like, subscribe, and let's get into this. So the first article, novelists decry so-called romance fiction in current women's literature as pornography. Novelist Hilary Lane described much of what she describes as the so-called romance fiction in current women's literature as pornography. In a video uploaded to YouTube, Lane stated, "The first thing we need to establish is that all this so-called romance fiction, and most of it, if not all, of the current women's literature out there is not women's literature, it's porn. And she's spot on. It is all just pornography. I actually need to watch this video because I assume I'm going to agree with a lot of what she has to say. If any book has the words veiny member in it, immediately it's porn. I don't care. I don't care what the context is. It's pornography. She went on to declare its normalization of explicit adult entertainment. In fact, she later stated that the normalization has already happened. A four-letter word starting with a P has taken over the literary word. Barnes & Nobles and every other major independent bookseller, especially all those new romance bookshops, have now just become another kind of adult entertainment store. She would specifically note that this includes books by Rachel Gellig, Rebecca Yarros, Jennifer L., a bunch of names that I don't care about. One of my favorite things is a lot of these books are being written with AI, and they're just leaving the prompts in, and, like, the women are so starved for sexual content, they don't even bother to care that it's written by AI. And this really gets to the hinge of the matter. The problem is, now that this is the dominating style of novels, there's nothing for kids to read. There's nothing that I could in good faith give to a child, like, hey, here's a new book, why don't you read this? Sure, there are some children publications still being made, but they're mostly for little kids, and then half the times you're getting stuck with the gay BCs. When I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do was to go to my parents' giant wall of books, pick one, and start reading it. I rarely ever actually properly read it, but I liked the idea of it. And going up and like, can I read this one? Is this one appropriate for my little kid mind? Remember when I was able to read How Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert A. Heinlein? What a fantastic experience it was, being able to find something targeted both towards my demographic as a young male, but also overworldly. Something that explored the notion of somebody my age going to outer space. Well, not really my age. He was like 16, I was like 10 at the time, but it felt like my age. I project myself onto it. He didn't feel that much older than me. Whereas modern books, it's nothing more than all these weird, quirky ways that barely legal women can end up in romances with people twice their age. There was one that I saw that came out recently about a girl who developed romantic feelings for her dad's best friend when she was 3 years old, and this was perfectly fine to be published. Lane is far from the first to identify these books for what they are. Pop Culture Crisis host Mary Morgan described them as a scourge to humanity, and the women who are reading these so-called romance novels are a stain on the population. Truly, they're reading some of the most degenerate, disgusting things I've ever come across in my life. And yeah, if you've read some of these excerpts, these are horrendous books, filled to the brim with the most explicit material you could read. And it's very violent, oftentimes rapey, where the men are actively sexually assaulting and harassing the women in question. It's the most extreme level of degeneracy. These people who are actively praising books that have monsters carnally tearing at women's bodies just so they can have a little bit of sexual intercourse, which is usually non-consensual. Well, what's kind of funny is that this graph has been circulating recently of the top 15 least attractive hobbies to women, where the least attractive was comics, books, cosplay, debating, drinking, MTG, anime, makeup, crypto, cigars, clubbing, marijuana, Funko, arguing online, porn, gambling, and manosphere. When porn is one of the least attractive male hobbies, it's kind of an irony that smut is the most common woman's hobby. And this chart found that reading is the least unattractive hobby a man can do. And it's important to note that the women who are filling out these charts are the terminally online ones, who are also the ones who are known for reading these smut books. The target audience of these books and the people who are filling out these kind of surveys are the same people. So women who engage exclusively in extreme hedonism are making fun of men for engaging in light hedonism. There's another point made in the video where she said that it's not literature, it's porn. It's just written porn and it's being sold in Barnes & Nobles in its own section. And it's gone fully mainstream. And women are expecting to not be shamed for this because we live in a sexually liberated society and they're just living out their fantasies and you have no right to decry them for this. Women's sexuality cannot be shamed, cannot be bullied, cannot be expressed as something that's negative. Because otherwise you're going against your good feminist roots where women are allowed to do whatever they want, bar any consequences, even if the consequence is the harm to themselves. In fact, I wanted to double check to make sure. So here I am looking at Reddit. Can Barnes & Noble stop me from buying an 18-plus book as a minor? I am 16, so a minor. And can Barnes & Noble stop me from getting a book with smut in it? It may be a stupid question, but I want to go without my parents, with my own money, and treat myself. LOL. Thanks. I'm a Barnes & Noble's cashier, and we can't stop you from buying an 18-plus book. Had a 15-year-old come in and get berserk, you're fine. Plus, we can show you where the good shit is. So let's be very clear, not only can you go and buy this extremely graphic, extremely pornographic material without an ID, but on top of that, these cashiers will gleefully show children where to find it. This person just admitted to leading a 15-year-old child to find where the good shit is. She is willing to show them where to find the most explicit and carnally devious pornography that they could possibly find in a Barnes & Nobles. There's no safeguards or rails against you reading this, but that'll become more pertinent in a little bit. Because it opens up a major question of whether or not these novels should be banned. Should we ban people from producing and selling these books? My simple answer is no. My simple answer is no. I utterly oppose all forms of censorship because censorship is always a slippery slope. 100% of the time, it will lead to a slippery slope problem. Just look at what happened in the UK, where they banned porn and then suddenly suppressed all kinds of information that is actually necessary to know, such as riots over the sexual assaulting of an illegal on an underage girl. They banned that information in England using the law that was made to ban porn. But the catechisms of the Catholic Church make this abundantly clear. Civil authorities should prevent the production and distribution of pornographic materials. However, as apologist Trent Horn notes, that's a mighty task, but he suggests that action be taken and says it starts at home. He advises people to get our own households in order, protect ourselves, protect our children, and then be a witness to other people, and really call it the evil pornography, just like we call it all the evil of abortion. Trent then goes on to mention the Comstock Act, which states every obscene, lewd, lascivious, indecent, filthy, or vile article, matter, thing, device, or substance is declared to be non-malleable matter and shall not be conveyed in the mails or delivered from any post office or by any letter carrier. Whoever knowingly uses the mails for mailing, carriage in the mails, or delivery of anything declared by this section or section 3001, the title 39 to be non-mailable, or knowingly causes to be delivered by mail according to the direct thereon, or at the place at which it is directed to be delivered by person whom it is addressed, or knowingly takes any such thing from the mails. This is a lot of gibberish. Basically, it's saying that you shouldn't be allowed to mail porn. Okay, fine. Here's the real thing, though. This isn't a solution, because you can ban all the porn publications. I worked at the hospital during COVID, at a local hospital. I was a COVID screener. My job was to check people in when they came in and make sure they didn't have COVID before entering the hospital. I didn't do anything. But I had a coworker, great woman, but she sat there on her phone reading smut. I remember looking over one time, and it was some I read her phone because it was a huge font, and it was something about vampires sexually assaulting one another. And I'm like, I'm working in a hospital attached to one of the most important children's hospitals in the fucking country, and you're over here reading vampire smut. Good Lord. So banning the ability to mail these books will achieve nothing. Banning the ability to buy these books in stores will achieve effectively nothing. You'd have to go after websites like Wattpad, like DeviantArt, all these places which have the most lax of age verification and security. Though, of course, that's not to say I approve of age verification, because it's either incredibly easy to trick or it's overtly and extremely invasive. And that's ultimately where Fandom Pulse crosses the line, is how they think we should actually go about handling this pornographic material. As Fandom Pulse posts, romantasy and the lie of libertine freedom. Lane's central insight is that pornography and the moral debate around it have been rigged. Men who consume smut are shamed, though not always helped. Women, by contrast, are shielded from critique by a society terrified of ever appearing to constrain female sexual expression. The result is a double standard so glaring that it can only be sustained by the kind of institutional gaslighting that passes for cultural discourse today. And that's a spot-on claim. Men who engage in pornographic activities, either smut or visual, are shamed. They're degenerates, they're disgusting, they're scourges, they're abusers, they're harassers, they're creeps, and most importantly, they are rapists. Just for the fact that they engage in the material. Whereas when women do it, they're nothing more than people engaging in liberty and people who are doing whatever they want. But here's where I draw issue, in that where this person lies out, but there's a third party at the table, one Lynn touches on only briefly, and which I want to drag fully into the light. The third side doesn't promote pornography per se, nor does it excuse it through identity politics or feminist slogans. No, their motto is freedom. You know the line, you've heard them all your life. It's a free country. What consenting adults do in private is their business. Don't like it, don't read it. That side that trots out these lines wrap themselves not in pink hair and rainbow flags, but in paper shields marked free speech, free market, and freedom of choice. They are not shameless smut peddlers or the feminist enablers, but they are libertines. And they are the most insidious of all, because they pretend to be morally neutral. They love to quote John Stuart Mill, Thomas Jefferson, and occasionally the Constitution, but what they really worship is license, the capacity to do whatever one wants without consequences, and more importantly, without judgment. So, I will admit that there is a little bit of truth to what he's saying. It's the libertarian lie. The claim that people are capable of self-governing, which we know they aren't. It's what libertarians want to believe, is what libertarians want to rule by, but of course, it's nothing more than a pipe dream. Problem is, he's applying this to things like reading, and to entertainment, and of course, adult material. And there are some issues there. For instance, he conflates the ability to allow people to do what they want with not shaming them. Social pressure is not an anti-libertine or libertarian expression. We can shame people for engaging in pornographic materials. There's nothing wrong with that, and that doesn't violate the libertarian experience. The libertarian experience merely dictates that we cannot codify it into law. And that's the answer. We don't need laws to make it illegal to sell, buy, or read these kind of materials. What we need is social pressures. We need good, strong fathers ensuring their daughters aren't reading this kind of stuff. We need good, strong fathers to make sure their kids aren't looking it up online in excessive amounts. We don't need legality, we need society. We need society to step up. We need the home to become a house again, something protective and something that watchdogs over harmful societal problems. But the article continues, these libertines pose as champions of humanity, dignity, and individual agency, but are, at the end of the day, they are parasites feeding off the moral capacity of a civilization they neither built nor defend. Well, I guess I can give a little bit more to that one. A lot of libertarians are actually of the position that they could lead themselves. Now, hold on, I need to check something. Okay, this is what I had to check, because I want to make sure I wasn't making some kind of, ontological goof. The key to I wanted to make sure that libertarian and libertine are not different things, and it looks like they slightly are different things. So I want to clarify that up right now. The key distinction lies in the balance between rights and desires. Libertarianism is concerned with the rights and limits of state coercion, whereas libertinism centers on the pursuit of personal desires without regard for moral or social consequences. Alright, I had to make sure that was clear, because I was under the impression that they were the same term, just different. So I apologize for everything I just said. Libertines are in fact a social parasite and problem, in that they refuse to accept the pressure of society has on people. They refuse to acknowledge that you need constraint, you need social constraint, whether it's a church or through simple moral grandstanding, you need somebody to protect you from hedonistic desires. Whereas a libertine is someone who's deeply hedonistic, is going to permit anything and all things to happen. And so it makes the appeal to heroin that happens later in the essay a little bit more transparent. This is why Lynn's heroin analogy is spot on. No one seriously argues that shooting up and living in your room is a noble expression of autonomy. But when it comes to media designed to arouse and addict, when the dopamine fix comes from a Kindle screen instead of a needle, we're expected to stand down in the name of freedom. Now, this is a relatively pro-regulation argument I've heard, where they compare pornography to either alcohol or drugs, saying that it has similar harmful effects, and if the government has a right to restrict that, why can't they restrict pornography? And the simple answer is, it's a different system. Porn is decentralized. I can get it anywhere. I can go anywhere to get it. I look it up. It's free on Google. I can just look at Google Images. I can go to Reddit and I can see all the stuff I want. I can go to Blue Sky and there it is. Whereas drugs, it's much harder to get. It's not a decentralized thing whatsoever. The article continues, so freedom has only as much value as the good it grants access to. No more, no less. Freedom of speech is good only because truth is good. Freedom of religion is good only because worship of that which is worthy is good. Freedom of enterprise is good only because the fruits of honest labor are good. Once a freedom is used to pursue something intrinsically disordered, like lust, it ceases to be freedom at all. It becomes slavery disguised as liberation. A man who can't put down his phone because he's addicted to gooning isn't free, neither is the woman who reads herself into a dopamine coma with enemies to lovers erotica dressed up in gold foil covers. Well, I'm sorry, but those are not the same thing. This is an actively false comment. Yes, any kind of freedom can become a vice, can become a slippery slope into something dangerous and derogatory. But that doesn't have to do with lust. Lust is not the only thing. You don't think you can abuse your freedom of speech? Sure, freedom of expression is incredibly important and valid, but there are ways you can go about it which are actively detrimental and harmful. If you run around screaming slurs all day, even if I believe people should not be offended by slurs, some people are. That's still an expression of freedom of speech, but it's still also a problem. Or what about when you go around actively verbally harassing people? That's still your freedom of speech, but it's more that you're impeding on the freedoms and liberties of other people. If your only difference as to when something is a good thing or a freedom or a vice is whether or not it is a good or bad thing, is a really dubious and nebulous line. What if I argued that I thought that smut being widely acceptable was a good thing because it meant that there was no pigeonholed on human sexuality and exploration? You can make that argument and claim that it is a completely good thing and therefore it is in fact a freedom. You have to justify what makes one thing in its severity form a freedom and what makes one thing in its severity a vice. Because while I agree with you on paper, you are opening the door for a slippery slope. The article continues, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Publishing sexually explicit material for profit is not morally neutral. It is calculated exploitation of human weakness. When the intended audience is adolescent girls, it's predation. Calling it empowerment is a diabolically clever con, and I do agree there. What we are doing is we are actively marketing towards children pornographic material, something that you should not do. Nobody should be doing this, because it is actively inconscionable. And yes, the publishers are not morally free. They are not barred of moral responsibility. They are complacent and culpable for this action and for the degeneration of these young children who are exposed to this material. But then they continue. Lane rightly notes that literature didn't become sexualized overnight. The rot has been spreading for decades, quietly infecting everything from literary fiction to airport thrillers. But the infection vector was neither female authorship per se, nor the female readership. It was the publisher's abandonment of objective standards of the good in the favor expression of individualism that says if it feels good, do it. The root problem isn't that women write sex scenes, it's that we as a culture no longer believe restraint is a virtue. These days, modesty is seen as repression, and people believe they are most truly themselves when they are ruled by their most fleeting impulses. And that's another great comment to be made, honestly. One of the big issues I see a lot is a lot of people, especially in my age demographic and millennials, are shaming men if they are virgins before marriage. Now, I'm somebody who believes absolutely in abstinence until you are actively in a solid relationship, not till marriage. But I don't believe you should say have sex on the first date unless it's really appropriate to do so. I'm someone who values abstinence and self-control. And therefore, I agree entirely that this kind of excessive self-expression is nothing more than vices disguised as self-expression and indulgence. The problem isn't what's being written, it's how severe it is, how utterly untied to reality it has become. And of course, that article and many others bring up a major problem. They advocate for things like banning these kind of books, from preventing people from being allowed to sell or make or write these kind of novels. When in reality, we don't need a ban because, well, censorship is always a slippery slope. What we need is some kind of regulation. We need these stores to step up and start enforcing age verification on them, like we used to do with the movies. We need people to step up there. And I mean, if I can't buy Cyberpunk 2077 as a 16-year-old, I'm not 16, I'm not. But when I was 16, I wouldn't have been allowed to buy Cyberpunk 2077, or even Deus Ex, which has no sex in it. I wouldn't be allowed to buy that as a 16-year-old, but I can go and buy this as a 13-year-old. That's not fair. There's a problem there, and what we need to institute is a way for these stores to actually ensure that people are of age before buying these kinds of books. We need society to step up, not the law. We don't need the daddy government to come in here with his big stick and make sure we aren't jerking it off. We don't need cornflakes to keep our sexual drives low. We need social pressure and establishing a need for us to engage in healthier attitudes, healthier desires, and healthier expressions of our sexual inclinations. We need society to push this, not the books, not the law, and not daddy government. Because when they push that, when will they stop? Sure, they might start with pornographic materials, but how long until they're banning things like Robert A. Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land for exploring very unique aspects of human society? Where will they stop? How can we trust them to stop in an appropriate place? The law isn't the answer, it's a shift in culture. When you see a woman reading TikTok book slop, you should be laughing at her. Not shaming her, don't call her a slut, don't call her that. You should laugh at her for being somebody who can't go 5 minutes without overly sexualizing themselves. That's the answer, is shame and social pressure, not legal ones. But that's pretty much all I've got. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this, and I will see you guys on the next one.